Grace opened his mouth, but still didn't speak. He knew for himself that now was not the time to make his feelings known. After Charles left home, he subconsciously walked to the route where Natasha often went to buy groceries, and happened to see Natasha, who was carrying things towards her home, but he didn't go up to say hello. Instead, he hid in the alley next to him. It's just that his burning gaze was already too familiar to Natasha. Even if he hid in the shadowy alley, he still caught Natasha's attention. "Charles, what are you doing here? Have you eaten yet?" Natasha carried her things and stood at the entrance of the alley looking up and down, frowning, but did not directly open her mouth to ask. There was no use hiding, so Charles simply pulled his suitcase and walked out. With the setting sun shining on his face, his wretched appearance fell into Natasha's eyes. "Do you want to go back with me? Eat together," said Natasha. Natasha raised the dish in her hand. Charles silently stared at Natasha for a long time, suddenly let out a sigh of relief and lowered his head. Good. He was like a wounded wolf who had removed all his defenses around his beloved mate, and then naturally took the dish from Natasha's hand. Although she had a million questions in her mind, Natasha composed herself and only glanced at Charles from time to time. He wasn't sure now where Self and Charles were at in their relationship. After so many days of contact, he no longer had the stereotypical impression of Charles, but instead felt that Charles was very smart and knew everything in his heart, but just wasn't willing to open his mouth to defend himself, and that's why he took the blame. Walking on the road, Charles finally opened his mouth and said, "I have no place to go, Senior." If it was the first day they met, Natasha would have thought that Charles was playing some kind of trick, but now, he only felt his heart being tugged. Obviously the man was so perky and cheerful in college. Natasha didn't know how to comfort people, but just obediently reached out and inserted his hand into Charles's hand that was carrying the plastic bag, and said imperceptibly, "Come home with me." There was that tenderness again. Charles's nose once again began to sour. Subconsciously, he clenched his hand, but was afraid to make Natasha's grip hurt, and hastily loosened some. But he didn't expect Natasha to hold Charles's hand tightly and not let him withdraw it. Charles's nose was completely sore, and he could only hum out a nasal, The man was as foul as ever. Holding Natasha's hand, Charles thought back to their first meeting. That day, he had saved Natasha from the hands of punks and received the same kind of tender response. Even though Natasha had already recognized him at that time and knew that he was the unforgivable bully that other people talked about, Natasha still helped him with timidity. The first time he'd been treated with that kind of tenderness, he couldn't help but get attached to the man. It was also fortunate that he had learned to undo the thorny armor he wore around his heart, and that he was still in hot pursuit of Natasha, or else he would really have nowhere to go today. The 50-square-foot hut was empty everywhere. Everything was worn out, except for the large and small awards that were randomly placed in every corner. Natasha's family had died unexpectedly some years ago, and since then he had lived alone, but had kept the hut in good order. Before Charles could take a closer look, he was pushed into the bathroom by Natasha. "Go ahead and take a shower, you're covered in dust. By the way, there are no new towels at home. If you don't mind, you can use the one hanging. I just washed it yesterday." Charles naturally didn't mind. He even perversely liked it. Oh good. With the sound of water coming out of the bathroom, Natasha sat in her chair for a moment before returning to the kitchen to prepare dinner. He wasn't sure if bringing Charles back was the right thing to do. All he knew was that this vacation from college wasn't going to be another peaceful one. Hot oil shot out in all directions as the vegetables came off the pan, getting on Natasha's hands and burning him. Charles, who was coming out of the bathroom and hadn't had time to put on his jacket, saw this scene and didn't care that he didn't have his shirt on. He walked straight into the kitchen, reached out from behind Natasha, and lifted his right hand that was splashed by the hot oil. A small red spot was already visible on it. Why so careless? He was already wearing so little in the middle of summer that Charles's body heat instantly traveled to Natasha's skin, and all he felt was a firework explode in his head with a bang, blowing up his mind so that he couldn't say anything else. It was the sound of the pan that brought him back to his senses, and he quickly turned around with his head down, blushing as he tried to push the man out. "It's okay. What kind of frying doesn't get splattered with oil? You go out and get dressed first. It'll be over soon." Except that as soon as he turned around, he saw the well-defined abs. Charles, also known as Grace, has very nice wheat-colored abs. The side waist of the mermaid line smooth and natural deep into the waist of the pants. The abdomen, there are some black hairs soft and obedient to form a triangle of momentum. That one moment, Robert out of the scene, he knew Grace's body is very good, but did not expect to be so good. Even recalled that pectoral muscles full of feel. But in the camera, Robert's these moves, and extremely in line with the character Natasha. Director when sat in front of the monitor without stopping. Only Grace really and truly felt Robert's panic, even though it was only for a second. But when Leong didn't call a halt, so he could only continue to act. A shower away, Charles had long since put those discomforts behind him, and now, Natasha was his main course. He hooked up the corners of his nasty lips and whispered in Natasha's ear like a demon. "What? Want a touch? Get out. Go get dressed." If he hadn't been in the kitchen with the pot still cooking, he would have wanted to give Charles a 5-finger print on his stomach. Hit it hard. Humph. Thinking that though, Natasha turned back around with a red face and picked up the pot again, only for it to emerge a wheat color. Charles laughingly stopped molesting Natasha, turned around, and went to his suitcase to find clothes to put on. When the food came out of the pot and Natasha brought it to the table, Charles was looking straight at him with an interested face, causing Natasha to squirm for a while. What are you looking at? Looking at you. So pretty. Charles sassily found a tight shirt and froze with the deep V open for Natasha to look at. Tisk. Natasha put her bowl down in front of Charles without a fuss and turned back to sit down, but she couldn't help but keep her eyes drifting. Eat. He wasn't sure if he was talking to Charles or self. Charles didn't say anything, so he pretended to be too hot in general, straightened his chest again, and picked up his chopsticks to clip the food. Senior's cooking is so delicious. Natasha was really hard to resist this handful of his teasing skills, and gave Charles a blank look without any good manners, putting down her chopsticks. Eat yours, eat before you talk. Okay. After absent-mindedly finishing a meal, Natasha didn't pack up her things, but sat squarely and started to make an appointment with Charles. I'm going to work some odd jobs this summer, and you're not allowed to interfere with my work. Fine. No casual undressing. Okay. No hitting on me. Well, Charles hesitated for half a moment, but still replied, good. But in his mind, he was thinking, I can't make a move on you. You can make a move on me. Hee hee. With that thought, he grinned nastily again, watching Natasha cross her eyes at him again without a good look. Cut. This scene is over. As Director Wynn's voice finally sounded, Grace put down her chopsticks and breathed a long sigh of relief. Phew, it's finally over. This part had a bit too much inner drama, heeing many times in a row, and luckily Robert didn't blame him. Thinking so, he grinned broadly at Robert, not at all the same kind of a bellyful of bad air just now. Robert secretly smacked his lips. Grace, this set of changing face is really quite suitable for acting. He didn't even know that Grace was acting in her own color just now, and the little puppy look was Grace's acting around him. In fact, it wasn't really acting. Grace was just releasing the little princess in her heart. Robert, you are awesome. So many strips actually didn't make any mistakes at all. Humph. Robert grunted lightly and glanced at the open deep V again without a trace, just substituted in. After looking at it for so long, he still wasn't immune. Sheesh. He finally knew what it was like to have that physical liking the internet talked about. Especially after mixing in Natasha's feelings for Charles, Robert found it even harder to discern the emotions in his heart these days. Naturally, all of these little glances of his fell into Grace's eyes, and he couldn't help but feel a little more pleased with himself. He pinched up a layer of skin on his stomach and said with disgust but bragging, Robert, actually I used to have a lower body fat percentage, but now I've gained weight. Robert thought irreverently. Huh, if you're considered fat, what do you want people to do? As Grace let go of her hand, the layer of skin quickly bounced back, leaving only 2 light red fingerprints, and Robert's eyes became a little darker. I think it's fine now. If we lose any more weight, we'll just have skin. That's not very healthy. Hey, is that right? Robert thinks it's just fine too. Grace felt that the two of them were still not close enough to talk across the table, and moved her stool again. Let me tell you, in my family, I'm the one with the best body. When I was working out, my mom especially hated it when my dad and my brother were lazy, and often took a small whip to whip them. Robert, is it really okay to tell me such things? He opened his mouth, not quite daring to believe that the rich man's family life was so plain and simple. Grace, however, thought Robert didn't believe it and tried to grab Robert's hand to let him touch it. Luckily, the camera's position was well adjusted, and Director Wynn's "On your mark" saved Robert. Let's go. Robert jumped straight up and headed for the bedroom. Grace, left behind, sat on a stool and chafed alone for a while. Gee, how could it be set up so quickly? But still, she had to follow Robert's footsteps. Within action, Robert slowly looked up and became Natasha again. You. Natasha sat on the edge of the bed with a very torn expression. Charles lowered his head to meet Natasha's eyes for a long time before restraining the urge to pounce on the person. He turned and tried to get out. I'll go sleep in the chair. The move to retreat worked, and Natasha immediately reached out and pulled Charles back. No need. Sleep together. His voice was weak as a kitten's, and when he finished, he immediately rolled over onto the bed, rolled in on the inside, and then made a mark in the center of the bed. He pointed to this chow line and looked over at Charles, saying firmly, You. No crossing the line. Charles turned as he rolled over onto the bed and looked at the one mark with nothing but amusement. Still, he nodded honestly and lay down on his side of the bed in a disciplined manner. There were no words for a while, only the dim light from the street lamps outside the window filtering in through the cracks in the curtains. I don't know how long it was, but Charles turned on his side to look at Natasha and called out softly, Senior. He had thought that he wouldn't disturb Natasha if she was asleep, but he didn't expect Natasha's body to tremble slightly with his words, and immediately realized that the man wasn't asleep either. Huh. Charles let out a low laugh and tentatively reached out, pressing on the side of Natasha's waist. Sleeping? Even though it was through her pajamas, that hot palm still made Natasha's body shake even worse, and her eyelids kept shaking. But Charles, seeing that he just wouldn't wake up like a shrunken turtle, didn't make any more moves, and just let out a sigh of relief. Senior, I like you. Cut. That's all for today. Everyone go back and rest. With Wen Liang's release, the set was suddenly lit up. Grace suddenly tugged on Natasha's pajamas. He didn't want to let go, but had to. AI. He let out a regretful sigh in his heart, and got up to casually grab a piece of clothing and put it on. But Robert didn't get up first. Just now Grace's confession directly broke through his heart defense. He can't lie to himself anymore. He could no longer lie to himself. Following Grace out of bed, Robert walked out without saying a word, and had no other thoughts. He wanted to get away from Grace for a while. Hey, Robert. Seeing Robert pass by and not talking or laughing with self anymore, Grace scratched her head a bit helplessly. Was he doing something wrong somewhere? When he walked to the lounge, he saw that Robert had already finished changing and came out. Robert, what just happened? Are you upset? Robert's mood hadn't been quite right since the afternoon when he found out Grace had a sweetheart, but he hadn't expected it to be so obvious that even Grace could detect it. He froze for a moment and quickly put on a professional fake smile. It's okay. A little tired. You should go and change your clothes. Go back to rest early. Oh, Grace nodded dully, but always felt that something was wrong, but he couldn't see through Robert's intentional concealment, so he had to keep a button in his heart for now. Oh, then Robert, wait for me for a moment. I'll be right out when I'm changed. Sitting in the car, Grace felt that Robert had become cold to the naked eye, but pinned her hopes on the fact that Robert was really too tired and didn't have anything against him. There were no words on the way, and Robert sensed Grace's caution and couldn't help but feel a little annoyed with himself. Because of his irritation, he didn't notice the man next to him. With that thought, he tried to find something to talk about to break the frozen atmosphere. You have a morning running habit? Sitting in the elevator with Robert, Grace suddenly felt that the atmosphere between the two of them had come alive and immediately smiled coquettishly. Well, I've been practicing in the morning for many years, Robert. I see that you have some equipment at home as well. Do you want to join us? Also, what time? Tomorrow morning together. It's over. That feeling of not being able to say no is back, Robert thought to himself. Speaking of which, he did slack off a bit lately, and a small ring of fat was starting to form on his stomach. Robert simply closed his eyes and gave up on himself. Forget it. Being a gym hitchhiker for the time being is fine. Grace will probably be moving back in when the show is done. It's obviously just a small thing, but Grace is happy. He could exercise with Robert, yay. Sure, I'll come get Robert at 7:30 then. Obviously it was late. Grace's voice was still energized, causing Robert another moment of discomfort. Too much enthusiasm. Worthy of a youthful male university. After mentally sputtering, Robert still remembered the time. Once they were each back inside, he set an alarm for his cell phone and sat down on the couch in a daze. Grace, what am I going to do with you? Physiological liking was unreasonable, but his reason was telling him over and over again that Grace already had a crush on someone, and that the two of them had too many gaps to make it possible. With that in mind, he picked up a novel from the corner of the bookshelf and evasively immersed himself in it so completely that he didn't come out of its beauty until he fell asleep. While on the other end of the wall, Grace excitedly picked up her cell phone and reported today's progress to his brother. Brother, today, I seem to have successfully seduced Robert. Darren, huh? What are you farting about? Grace, brother, don't believe me. I had to take off my clothes for today's scene, and then I saw the tips of Robert's ears were red. Isn't it a sign that Robert likes me? Darren's head is full of black lines. Please don't be so narcissistic. It's not true that overworking out attracts the same sex. But are you sure it's that kind of attraction? Why don't you say that Jean from the gym still looks for you every day? His waifu can even run on the ground. Grace was speechless by his brother's dislike. Angrily spread out on the bed, rolled over again and rode on the dog pillow on the bed, and continued to type. I don't care. Robert was just shy at that time. Darren was genuinely afraid that his brother's fanboy filter was too strong and he'd make some jokes. You restrain yourself? Don't fall out, and you can't be friends. What if Robert is straight? Looking at this question, Grace frowned and wanted to tell his brother about self-speculation, but after typing a large paragraph on his cell phone, he deleted it all. He was not sure what to do with himself. But in front of his brother, he still didn't want to admit defeat, and he typed out a line with a stiff upper lip. Brother, Robert is shooting a double male lead scene with me, and he doesn't resist my contact at all. Darren, so what? Robert can't be a good actor? Besides, a movie is a movie. If you're doing a male-female scene, how can you still like a woman? Grace was speechless again, and only after a long time did he type out a line. Then what do you think we should do? You're asking me? How would I know? Darren, being a workaholic, perfunctorily sent over the content he found out from the degree of acceptance. First XXX, then XXX, then XXX, in short XXX. What an official statement. Grace rolled his eyes. He shouldn't have asked his brother about this. Though falling asleep with resentment, Darren woke up a high-spirited dog again, affectionately offering Robert a wake-up call. Robert had an alarm clock and didn't need it. So upon opening the door and seeing the big smile plastered on Grace's face, Robert found it a little too harsh. Morning, Robert. Grace was dressed in a sharp sports outfit that exuded vigor all over her body. It also dispelled Robert's sleepiness caused by not waking up early for a long time. Morning. Give me a minute. I'll be right there. Robert went back to the house and brought a black plastic bag out. Grace still wanted to help Robert to take it, but Robert, as if it was loaded with bombs, hurriedly moved his hand away, not letting Grace catch it. Then he lightly said, "Let's go. Don't make it late. You'll be late later." The upscale neighborhood has a plastic running track, and Grace basically got acquainted with all the dog walkers and runners after her run yesterday. Robert followed Grace with a slightly ragged breath, admiring his ability to talk to anyone. Is this what they call a social cow? Robert smacked his lips inwardly, stating that this was a height he would never be able to reach in his lifetime. Grace felt it was almost time to warm up and slowed her pace slightly to be flush with Robert. "Robert, I'm done warming up. I'm going to go over to the equipment area to do some impedance. Do you want to join me?" Having not exercised so much in a long time, Robert felt a little unable to keep up, but his mouth responded, "Sure." His subconscious was screaming, he's still only 28. He wasn't old yet. "Well, then Robert, you can follow along with me then." Grace ran with Robert to the fitness equipment area, did some slight stretching, and bent straight down to the floor. "Robert, do push-ups together?" Good. Robert, follow my rhythm. 1, 2, 3, 4. Following a few sets, Robert stood up and suddenly had a sense of the Lou artiste. He thought that after doing push-ups, it was over, but what Robert never expected was that Grace would continue to go up to the bar to do the pull-ups. This is not something that can be simply followed down. Robert reluctantly followed suit and did 2 more, feeling that if he continued any longer, he would be wasted, and hastily jumped off the bar. He didn't want to strain a muscle and interfere with the shot. Robert walked to the side, gasping for breath, thinking to himself that he hadn't exercised for too long. If it was in the past, he could easily keep up. Grace paused for a moment as Robert jumped off the bar, then resumed pulling the pull-ups. As he did, the abs he'd seen yesterday peeked out from under the hem of his shirt, glowing in the sunlight. TCH, this guy is really giving off hormones all the time. Thinking so, Robert pushed the tip of his tongue against his tiger teeth, using the pain stimulus to bring back his sanity. 15. Grace exclaimed, jumping off the bar and looking over at Robert with gusto. "Robert, I broke the record." With his abs recovered by his clothing, Robert shifted his eyes upward slightly and nodded at Grace. "Very impressive." Hey, that's okay too." Being stared at by Robert like this, Grace scratched the back of her head a little shyly, then laughed nervously. "Robert, you've only done 2. You still need to practice more." "What do you mean? That I'm not good enough?" Although he didn't want to admit it, Robert's body is not very good right now, and he had to accept this fact, but still didn't have the good sense to fling the towel to Grace harshly. "Rest for a while, go to the morning." Haha. Grace playfully spat out her tongue and took the towel to dry the sweat from her face. "As you wish." Only the front he dried off, but the back was a little hard to reach. He frowned and turned his head to Robert, a little hesitant to ask Robert for a favor. "That, Robert, What's wrong?" At that, Robert shifted his eyes back to him, just to see Grace twisting her arm to show him a hand that couldn't reach the back. "Robert, I can't wipe my back because it's wet with sweat." The days were beginning to fall, and the morning breeze was still a little chilly, and Robert stood still for a moment as the heavens met the earth, finally convincing himself. He was only worried that Grace would catch a cold and affect the progress of the shooting. "Turn around, I'll rub it for you." Thanks, Robert." Grace smiled defenselessly and happily handed the towel to Robert and turned around, and even half squatted down as if she was afraid that Robert wouldn't be able to reach it. It was only after he had turned around that a glint of scheming brilliance flashed under his eyes. Robert let himself go and lifted the hem of Grace's back, gripping the towel and slipping his hand inside. In just an instant, he felt like he had entered the alchemy furnace of the Supreme Lord. Grace's body heat burned his hand to the point of numbness, not to mention the touch of the full muscles under his hand that made him want to pay no attention. TSK. Robert pinched impatiently, not expecting to pinch Grace's itchy flesh, and felt the muscles under his hand tremble again. "Robert, tickle." "Ha. Well, don't you move." Robert gave a good-natured slap and increased his efforts to hurry up and dry Grace off. At the same time, he looked up at the sky and thought, the sky is so blue. What the hell? He couldn't take his mind off it. Especially in the relative position of the two of them, he couldn't stop thinking about it. The realization had come, and Robert jerked his hand back in shock, tossing the towel to Grace. Okay. To be tempted like this early in the morning, who could resist? Robert looked at Grace in a bad mood and raised his steps to leave, but Grace bowed her back and took a few steps forward and sat on the stone bench. "Robert, I'll rest for a while." Robert's footsteps lurched, his sight sized up Grace, and turned his back in understanding. TSK, the youngster. Hey. Grace finally summoned her composure and straightened up, walking behind Robert. Robert, what do you want to eat in the morning? I'm treating you this time, so you shouldn't be able to say no. The whole person was enveloped by Grace's shadow. Robert again realized the height difference between the two. His heart was so upset for a while. It's great to be tall. He pulled away some distance without any trace, not rejecting Grace's idea of being an ingrate. Well, your treat. Robert really couldn't eat much in the morning, but as soon as Grace arrived at the store, she ordered a table full of food as if she was ordering a regular meal, and he couldn't stop it in time. Looking at all the food on the table, Robert was a little tense. Why did you order so much? It's a waste if you can't eat it all. Grace shook her head with a smile and didn't think it was a lot. Robert, you can eat whatever you want. I'll take care of what you can't finish. Robert. He didn't dare to really let Grace solve it, so he just moved a few chopsticks of fried dumplings with wine dregs. But what he didn't expect was that Grace could really solve it all. Seeing Grace eat the last fried dumpling into her stomach without even the slightest change in her belly, Robert opened his mouth and couldn't hold back the vomit in his heart. He had already said the word admiration badly. Okay, go back. Robert got up, but still glanced at Grace's stomach with some concern. Is it really okay to eat so much? Grace raised her hand and traced circles on her stomach, thought hard for a moment, and nodded. It's really okay. Okay. Robert stopped caring, only to hear Grace's giggling voice again as he made his way back to the door of his room. Robert, I want more coffee. Robert had his back to Grace, but could hear Grace's expression in that voice. It was definitely pouting. He couldn't close his hand on the door for a moment. Well, I'll leave the door open, so come over after you change. After saying that, he lifted his steps and fled into the inner room as if he were escaping, leaving Grace alone outside the door with a heady, demented smile. Hey Robert, you were so nice. Grace used the fastest speed in her life to take a shower and change her clothes. Then she couldn't wait to run into Robert's house. Robert, I'm coming in. However, his yell went unanswered. Grace yelled again, Robert? There was still only the sound of water in the house. Grace skimmed his lips and suddenly smiled badly, wanting to go for a surprise attack, but when he reached the bathroom door, he rationally restrained his heart. Robert, are you still in the shower? I'll be right out, so sit down for a while. As Robert's voice came out, the sound of water inside disappeared at the same time. Grace was really wanting to rush in. Robert, who was separated by a door, totally didn't expect Grace to move so fast. He just had Grace's morning look in his head, making him want to bully the man into tears. As a last resort, he took an emergency cool shower. Looking in the mirror, Robert shook his head helplessly itself before putting on his robe and opening the door. There was a click. Robert, you're all washed up. Caught off guard. Grace's handsome face suddenly took up half of Robert's field of vision, and the other half was Grace's unbuttoned white shirt. Career line. These three words suddenly appeared in Robert's mind. But then he laughed at himself. Grace had the right to dive him, but he was just an actor. What capital did he have to dive Grace? Grace had inflicted tons of mental attacks on Robert, but he wasn't much better. Robert's bathrobe was one of those one-piece ones, and how much was revealed depended on how tightly that one string around his waist could be imprisoned. So Robert now appeared in front of Grace with a deep V on top and bare calves. He really wanted to jump on her and tear her apart. Thinking so, Robert, however, came back to his senses first and coughed awkwardly. Go ahead and wait outside for a while. I'll change my clothes and come. His mind began to growl again. Damn, trying to take a cold shower again. Oh, good. Grace's mouth said good, but her eyes stared at the deep V and didn't move her feet, looking at Robert almost with the same hand and foot. The little man in his heart was roaring. What do you mean by looking at me so straightly when you have a sweetheart? Until Robert went into the bedroom and closed the door, Grace withdrew her eyes, licked her lips, and smiled. Robert, is still quite loaded too. Robert returned to his room and pulled out his black shirt and put it on, then buttoned it right up to the top and paired it with a pair of dark jeans that made him look extremely ascetic. He meticulously straightened his clothes and made a smile in the mirror. Well, that stabilized the dowsing. Little sample. Don't try to tempt me so easily. Bored, Robert followed his voice out of the bedroom to see Grace playing with a bouquet of manzanita in her hand. Where did you get those flowers? Grace froze again at the sight of his cool voice paired with his ascetic person. Robert is really, where anything looks good nah. Seeing the ascetic male god walking towards himself, Grace blinked and almost didn't hold the flowers in her hand. Seeing that he didn't reply for a long time, Robert slightly raised his eyebrows. What's wrong? Something on your shirt. With that, he glanced down at his own attire to make sure it was right before he rejoined Grace's eyes. Grace snapped back, so embarrassed she didn't know where to put her hands and feet. No, Robert, you're so handsome in this outfit. Looked dumbfounded, Grace said whatever came to her mind and came with a straight shot, not caring if Robert caught it or not. Ahem. Robert cleared his throat and the corners of his lips subconsciously curled up. I'll make coffee in a minute. You sit down for a while. With that, he was about to go around Grace to the kitchen, But Grace suddenly stopped in front of Robert, handing out the bouquet of flowers in her own hand. Robert, it's for you. Your house has only 3 colors. This bouquet is for you to spruce up the house, he said with sincerity, still holding the flowers in his hands and standing with light feet to the center of the living room, turned to look back and smiled brightly. Is it nice? The sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows, spilling onto his face and mirroring his smile. The bouquet was on his chest, starry and glowing. How could you say it didn't look good? Robert had never thought of Self's house as being a little cold, but now, he somewhat agreed with Grace. The room was indeed quite uninteresting. Robert's heartbeat missed a beat and slowed down before he nodded and said with a smile, It's nice, it's nice. Having gained Robert's appreciation, Grace wanted to put the bouquet down, but Robert immediately made a sound to stop his movement. He saw Robert quickly took out his cell phone and tapped on the camera interface. Click, click, click. The shutter sounded 10 times, and Robert took pictures from every angle he could think of before he stopped his hand with satisfaction. Okay, I'll send you the pictures later. Okay. Grace nodded obediently and helped Robert put the bouquet into a jar. In the center of the black, white, and brown room, a bouquet of white, blue, and pink interspersed with flowers caught the eye in the center of the coffee table. Robert took another look at it before heading out the door. That's it for now, he thought. He'll distance himself from Grace after the kill. Sitting in the car, Robert took the time to send the photo to Grace, and then put the original picture into the hidden album. Looking at the photos transferred to her cell phone, Grace happily flipped through them one by one, thinking that each one was a fine product. This is his Robert personally took the photos for him. Thinking so, his mouth did not stop. Robert, you are too good at taking pictures. Not even needing to pick it, Grace directly sent the 9 frames. Although he had only just debuted, he already had some face fans, and now that he saw the new picture, he immediately licked the screen below the comment section. Oh my god, oh my god, oh my god. My husband is too good looking. That's not true. Look at this face. Look at this body. Hissy, lick the screen. Upstairs, this is my husband. Please don't steal him, okay? You brainless fans, of course this is my son. Such a cute little puppy. How can there be such a milky and handsome little puppy in this world? Kneel down and ask for daily business. Aha. Grace does not have many fans, far less than Robert. So the spread of these photos is not wide, did not set off any waves, but also did not attract the details of the party to the background of the examination to Robert's home, so missed a wave of wind. Entering the set, Grace changed her makeup and stood under the camera. Charles tugged Olivia to a corner of the block with no intention of letting her go. Wasn't it you who was talking nonsense to my dad? All day long, you chew the scenery. Why are you everywhere? Looking at the anger on Charles's face, Olivia sneered and broke away from his, glaring back without showing any weakness. I'm the one who said it, so what? You dare to do it. With that, she looked Charles up and down, revealing a look of disgust. You're a man-fucker, dirty as hell, and you have the nerve to accuse me of anything. And that Natasha, hooking up with men, I don't think she's a good one either. Charles didn't care what Olivia said about him, but he wouldn't allow anyone to say anything about Natasha that wasn't true, and instantly blushed and pushed Olivia unmercifully. What did you say? Say that fucking again. Olivia hadn't expected Charles's reaction to be so great, and was caught off guard when she hit the wall behind her, her entire body freezing for 2 seconds before she could come to her senses. In an instant, her heart was flooded with bitterness. How did she fall in love with such a person? But this thought only lasted for a short moment before her mind was taken over by another thought. If I'm not doing well, you guys don't want to do well either. Olivia suddenly raised her leg, about to kick Charles, forcing him back 2 steps. Huh, say what? You 2 chicken girl fuck offenders? Just you wait. Everyone will know about this soon. It was too late. Snap. The author has something to say. Book friends, please remember the latest and most complete novel website, Miscellaneous Rhetoric Chinese Network. A crunching sound lingered around the two. Charles couldn't restrain himself from slapping Olivia, and it wasn't until he came back to his senses that he reacted to what Self had actually done, and Olivia fell to the ground in response. What are you doing? Coincidentally, Charles's father happened to be walking by and couldn't believe what he saw in front of him. He glanced at Charles in a daze, then at the fallen Olivia, and a wave of anger instantly surged through him as he rushed forward and kicked Charles in the face. Charles's father angrily kicks Charles to the ground, but puts on a curt smile as he turns his head to Olivia. Olivia, are you okay? It wasn't as if Olivia didn't understand why Charles's father was doing this to Self. Once she liked Charles and naturally suffered through it. Now, she just found Charles's father's mouth very disgusting. She didn't take Charles's father's hand. She stood up, took a good look at the father and son with a cold face, and left the neighborhood without saying a word. Charles's father actually wanted to say something to stay, but Olivia had already walked away, so he had to turn his head to Charles, who had already climbed to his feet. What were you doing just now? Huh? Out of breath. Can hit people now, can't you? With that, he reached out and yanked Charles by the collar, wanting to take him back for another lesson. But when he got upstairs, Charles's father locked Charles in the house first and started pouring bottle after bottle of wine. Again, he couldn't take in what he saw. When he finally felt like drifting off, he let the alcohol control his movements and went to open the door that held Charles, then drew out the belt around his waist. The moment the door opened, Charles's father's belt fell towards Charles. Seeing that he was about to be smacked in the face, Charles hurriedly sidestepped his head to avoid it, but he was still smacked in the shoulder. Hiss! Charles sucked in a breath of cool air. But how can a whip unlock the fire in his heart? Charles' father followed closely and wanted to continue to whip. Why did I give birth to such a beast like you? You've lost your face. How dare you fucking hit Olivia? With each word, he lashed out. But Charles had already prepared for it and dodged all of them sideways. In fact, he could have dodged the first whip just now. After all, he didn't know how many times he had eaten this old set of rules since he was a child. Haha, didn't you say for me not to come back? How come you drag me back again? Charles didn't even bother to pay attention to Charles's father's foul mouth. Instead, he was curious to know if this father of his really treated him as a son. Or was self, in his eyes, just an excuse to scam Olivia out of her money? But Charles's father's mind has been controlled by alcohol, which can still hear Charles's voice, still cursing to himself. I told you to fool around with that dog thing. I'll beat you to death. This sentence completely ignited Charles's impulse. He suddenly turned cold, reached out and yanked on the belt that came through the air. No one could insult his salvation, not even his father. His palms ached, but he tightened his grip on the belt even more so that Charles's father could no longer pull it out. You're just a drunk. I wanted you to give birth. And by the way, his name is Natasha. The only person who was ever nice to him. Charles took a step forward with each word until he was face to face with Charles's father. He hung his head slightly and realized that the man in front of him was already much shorter than himself and thin from all the years of alcoholism that had hollowed out his body. Charles's eyes revealed a flicker of pity, but it was followed by nothing but a coldness. Stop treating me as your appendage. The money I owe you, I will pay it back one by one. In the future, you don't want to be my father anymore, and I don't want to be your son anymore. Being completely suppressed by Charles's aura, Charles's father looked straight at him as he pushed self away and walked out of the room, as if he was down and didn't move. He didn't react until Charles left a backstory for self. He was actually frightened by this asshole kid. The thought scared him to death. How could he, as the head of the family, be scared? Thinking so, Charles's father raised his palm and slapped it towards the back of Charles's head. How dare you talk back? You've got hardened wings, huh? It's only natural for the old man to beat his son. I'll say what I like. You're a son of a bitch, and he's a son of a bitch. The sound of a crack rang out, and Charles, as if realizing what was going on, suddenly turned back to avoid it and pushed Charles's father in the face. Anger attacked for so long. Charles' father has long been strong. By Charles so pushed, he can't stand on his feet, backward and sat on the bed in the house. He still wanted to struggle up, but the sudden pain at the tip of his heart trapped everything he did. Even his voice couldn't come out. His face quickly turned pale, and finally he could only watch as Charles walked out of the house, letting out a breathless, "Help, cut." As the scene came to a close, when Leon stood up excitedly. Very good. The emotion is on point this time. This kind of outburst scene is really a hurdle for Grace. Although the last one passed Wenliang's eyes, but this one is even more intense, gracing sometimes. At this time, when he heard Wenliang finally call out, he let out a sigh of relief. It was only then that he felt as an afterthought a twitching flood of pain on his body where the belt had grazed him. Hiss! Grace sucked in a breath of cool air. Even though he said that he had already matched the scene in advance and wore a guard under his clothes, the belt was not as good as a stick in terms of direction, and there would always be a situation where he was out of control. Grace didn't blame Mr. 11 for his mistake, but just endured the pain and went to get his own cup of water. After seeing Grace being drawn for the first time, Robert had no other thoughts, and his eyes followed Grace's body for an instant. Seeing that director when finally put the word to end the shooting of this episode, Robert could not hold back any longer. He quickly walked to Grace's side, pulled up Grace's arm and walked towards the restroom, his footsteps no longer as steady as usual. When he reached the restroom, Robert turned to get the ointment he had just prepared and was about to help Grace apply the medicine. Why are you so careless? Robert helped Grace remove the brace that was placed on his shoulder. In order not to affect the filming effect, that guard was just a thin piece, and if the belt could fall right on it, it wouldn't cause too much impact. But the times Grace missed, the belt landed all the way on the inside of Grace's shoulder, imprinting red marks on his skin and even spots of blood. Seeing that Grace didn't refuse, Robert dug out a chunk of ointment and gently pressed it onto Grace's shoulder. The cool touch instantly made Grace cower for a moment, but immediately stopped moving again. This action fell in Robert's eyes, only to feel that this person really wants to be strong, and could not help but reduce the force. TCH, just yell out if it hurts. No one is laughing at you. But Grace had long been too confused to know why when Robert leaned over. Robert, medicating him? That single thought made him discard all pain. When the warm fingers finally left his self-same shoulder, leaving only a minty coolness, his whole body shuddered again. Then he lifted his head and grinned at Robert. Robert, it doesn't hurt. Robert mentally rolled his eyes and put the lid on the ointment without a second thought. Didn't we say we were right for the show? How come you're still pumped? What were you thinking just now? Robert's tone wasn't very kind, but Grace could just hear the connection and laughed even harder. Robert, the belt is not a stick. It's not normal to have mistakes. This is not over. Don't be angry. Maybe tomorrow will be better. Are you a dog? It will be fine tomorrow. Robert doesn't know who he's angry with in his heart. Don't delay tomorrow's shooting if you're not fully healed. Right. Don't delay the movie. It's never because of my selfishness. Robert thought so and felt a little bit more relieved. It won't, Robert. Grace smiled very proudly. He felt that Robert cared about him too. His efforts these days were not in vain. At that, a head poked through the doorway. Is everything okay, Grace? It was Amelia who came in. She only had one more scene to follow, so she was ready to leave early and came to say hello to Grace and Robert. It's fine. Grace stood up and met her curious gaze, then sensed something wrong in her gaze. Why are you looking at Robert and me like that? After saying goodbye to Olivia, Grace and Robert had to stay on the set. They have a scene later. In director Wynn's crew, the time to eat is not fixed, usually in the middle of two scenes to hurry up and take 2 bites. Otherwise, they might not be able to get down from a scene for several hours, and they would have to starve for several hours before they could eat. So Robert hurriedly took advantage of this time to let Stephen help bring back 2 boxes of boxed lunches. However, halfway through the meal, Grace's cell phone suddenly rang, and on the screen were written 3 big words: Zheng Xingxin, Robert and Grace's agent. Hello? Brother Zheng, what's up? Grace picked up the phone and didn't avoid Robert, causing Robert to cast a probing look. Zheng Kaisen was the one who brought Grace back after she arrived and had been Robert's agent before. So Robert was a bit surprised that he didn't look for himself, but for Grace. Hey Grace, Zheng Happy's voice came out of the cell phone, and he was heard asking directly to the point. Why are you at Robert's house? Cough cough. Grace almost didn't choke on the contents of his mouth. Why was he at Robert's house? With that thought, he denied. No, I'm at the theater. TSK. I mean those pictures of you in the morning. Zheng Kaisen's tone was a bit unkind. This matter was neither big nor small, but if Grace didn't realize the seriousness of this matter, then he had to mention it. Grace remembered the 9 frames she had already sent, and then she saw Robert staring at herself, asking him questions with his eyes. Grace looked away from her cell phone and said to Robert, I tweeted the pictures from this morning, haha. Gotta be, this guy was really good at messing things up. Understanding what was going on, Robert quickly mentally spat it out. Then he realized that he was the one who had held Grace down to take the picture, and awkwardly took 2 bites of his meal. Grace didn't bother to look at Robert's expression and hurriedly explained to Zheng Kaisen. My house is right next door to Robert's. I asked Robert to join me for a morning jog in the morning, and then I went to his house to rub a cup of coffee. Woof woof woof. The amount of information is a bit too large, and the slots are too many. Zheng Kaisen was a bit turned around. Hadn't these 2 been filming together for a small month? How come Grace was living next door to Robert? It's not like he hasn't let go for a few months before. So how come this time? He suddenly changed so much? Zheng Kaisen felt that he had to go back to school to learn the language before coming back. Just when Grace thought that the opposite party had hung up the phone, Zheng Happy's voice came out of the receiver again, this time, with an obvious anger. I won't say anything else about you, but do you realize that you're still a little transparent now? Do you still take pictures at Robert's house and send them out? If this matter is found out, what do you think the internet will say? What? You're not a child anymore. You should know the consequences of your actions. Why didn't you ask me first? He basically yelled. Even Robert could hear him. He reflected on himself for a moment. Well, it did seem like a pretty easy thing to fall back on. But on second thought, he felt it wasn't such a big deal, and several PR excuses flashed through his mind instantly. Having an idea, Robert held out his hand to Grace. Give me the phone. I'll talk to Lao Zhang. Huh? Oh good. Grace blinked and handed the phone to Robert. Picking up the phone, Robert calmly spoke. Hello? Lao Zhang, it's me. At once, the blazing fire in Zheng Happy's heart was doused by a pot of cold water. The rest of his words were held in his mouth, unable to be said. After working with Robert for so many years, Zheng Kaisen had sort of established a conditioned reflex. That is, as long as Robert opened his mouth, he had to listen honestly. Otherwise, he would just wait to be bombarded by Robert with all kinds of logic. Zheng Kaisen took a deep breath and leveled his tone. Cough. Robert, this matter. Only before he could finish his words, Robert interrupted again. Old Zheng, I also just thought of this out. This matter is considered to be my ill consideration. I pulled Grace to take a set of photos in the morning. He directly stopped the mistake, and then continued. However, it's too late to withdraw it now. Someone must have saved it, and then withdrawing it would be a bit of a here and now. I hear what you're saying, that it hasn't been dug up yet. So let's just leave it there for now. Then I'll have Grace post more updates lately to top that one off. And then when no one pays attention to it in a couple of days, I'll have him delete that tweet. After saying that, he paused for a moment and gave the next solution. If it's dug up, just say that it was too late to discuss the script together, and I left the people at home, and then put up some stills to confuse the public. After he had finished with all the good words and bad words, he still had to ask Zhang Kaisen what he meant. What do you think? This matter was not afraid of being discovered by ordinary fans, but the most feared thing was still the rival company's water army leading the rhythm. Nowadays in this world, this group of people can say that the white can be black, bite not dead people, disgusting people, really annoying. As for Zhang Kaisen, what else could he say? He only felt that Robert's last question was purely superfluous. Okay, let's do what you want. Robert, you've been on the ball lately. Human Grace is at least filming with you. Don't make any more mistakes. This period of time, he brought several people at the same time. Thought Robert and Grace in the shooting did not pay much attention, did not expect, or almost make trouble. Hearing Zhang Kaisen's reply, Robert smiled gently, but when he met Grace's eyes, it became a bit complicated again. Okay, I'll instruct Shunzi to look at the hot search more often. If there's a rhythm, I'll let you know. Don't worry if you leave the people to me. It won't happen again. What people are left in your hands? Grace blinked and thought in a tone-deaf way. He was happy to hand over himself to Robert. Robert didn't bother to scrutinize Grace's eyes, still talking back to Zhang Kaisen. Okay, that's it then. Hang up. With a busy tone, Robert put down his cell phone and saw a screensaver photo of himself on the brightly lit cell phone screen. It was a still from his hottest movie last year. The sky was cloudless, with only a full moon. He stood at the top of a mountain in a Taoist robe, immortalized, lifting a crystal wine glass and laughing maniacally at the moon. He still remembered the mood at that time, lonely, solitary. Only, this photo had been photoshopped. There was a hand reaching out from the sky, breaking the lonesome atmosphere, and facing Robert in the picture. Looking at this screensaver, Robert pursed his lips, pressed the lock button without moving, and handed the phone back to Grace upside down. It's just simple fan psychology, Robert thought to himself. After all, there are quite a few people who use his stills as wallpaper. He didn't even dare to think deeply about why the PD-up hand was so similar to Grace's. You heard what I just said, right? In the next 2 days, post more dynamics and top that picture in the morning. Other than that, you don't need to think much. Just focus on the movie. Lao Zheng will take care of it. Grace was actually very much looking forward to how Robert would react after seeing his wallpaper. However, he waited until he retrieved his phone, but he didn't get the response he wanted, and a trace of sadness couldn't help but rise in the bottom of his heart. Did he not see it? I don't think so. Just now the screen lit up. Thinking about it, he was a little angry again. He had clearly hinted to this extent. How could this person be indifferent? But now the time and place are not right. Grace pursed his lips, still did not have the guts to open his mouth to express his feelings. He listened to Robert's words, nodded his head obediently, and promised that he would need to tweet more about business in the next few days. The clouds were thick and heavy today, covering the setting sun and weighing it down to the point where it was hard to breathe, but it fit right into the plot. Charles stood on the floor of Natasha's house with a bruise, looking up at the window that let in the light, the only place of light he had in the world, but he was afraid that his own arrival would tarnish it. The sun was gradually returning to the earth, and he was slowly enveloped in shadow, except for his eyes, which now and then flickered with some light, and stared at the window with a deadpan expression. He did not know how long he had been standing downstairs, but the whole building was plunged into darkness, and even that window was completely devoid of light. But the darkness didn't last long, and just as Charles was about to turn away, the lights in Natasha's house came back on. With it came the sound of anxious footsteps coming down the hallway. Where are you going? Charles, startled by his own hoarse voice, not to mention Natasha, who was suddenly grabbed, immediately exclaimed, "Ah!" Only when she saw the owner of the hand that had grabbed him did Natasha breathe a sigh of relief and backhanded Charles's hand. "Why are you standing here? Why don't you go up?" "Ah, so it's me," Charles thought to himself. His heart, which had just fallen into silence, suddenly rippled again. "Just got back." He curled his lips, but lied. He didn't want Natasha to know about those bad experiences of his. It was just that Charles couldn't even defend himself, much less lie, and Natasha stared at Charles's face dead in the face, finally resisting the idea of pursuing the matter. "Go back first." "Good." Through the light of the hallway, the injury on Charles's face was visible. The mark that was drawn out by the belt was clearly visible. Natasha suddenly felt her heart being tightly gripped, and the footsteps of pulling Charles up the stairs also became more eager. The scene where Robert had just put medicine on Grace was reproduced. Only the two of them had switched venues. Hiss. Sitting on the chair, Charles sucked in a breath of cold air because his wound was touched by Natasha, but endured the pain and didn't hide. Natasha, however, was shocked by his reaction and hastily withdrew her hand, carefully asking, "Does it hurt?" He finished, and then felt that he was talking nonsense. How could it not hurt? But Charles shook his head slightly, not caring about the wound at the corner of his mouth, and grinned. Looking at Natasha made him feel no pain. Natasha frowned and applied the powder more carefully, but noticed Charles's clenched fist. What a guy. He wouldn't even yell out in pain. Natasha felt a little irritated inside and suddenly increased her force. Tell me if it hurts. If you don't, how will I know? Charles was broken by his words, so he could only grab Natasha's hand and hummed out softly. It hurts. Well, it's good to know that it hurts to cry out. I wouldn't know if you stopped talking. Natasha bristled, breaking away from Charles's hand and continuing to medicate him. That hurts. Charles cried out submissively with each press Natasha made, and in turn gradually relaxed his muscles. Finally finished rubbing the bruises on his face, Natasha wanted to tug on Charles's clothes, but she didn't expect to be grabbed by a hand. Charles took the powder in Natasha's hand and gently shook his head. No need. You go to sleep. I'll do the rest myself. Natasha locked eyes with him for 2 seconds, stubborn but this person, so she could only nod her head and walk back inside with 3 steps. Call me if something happens. Snap. Snap. The teardrops in Charles's eyes finally slid to the ground in large drops. He sat down in his chair and cried silently, looking around the room like a child. I thought you would not want me either. The final shot was only given to Charles, who was half undressed, and the scars on his body were hideous and heartbreaking. Cut. When Leon called a halt, he hadn't even expected this part to go over all at once. Grace's performance was so obviously vicarious that even he couldn't pick fault with it. Watching Robert walk from the room to hand Grace a tissue, he yawned. All right, everyone. It's been a hard day. Break it up, break it up. Grace collected her teardrops this time, just a little like a frosted eggplant. He was a little envious of Charles. At least Charles had chased someone, whereas he was still in the middle of his eights. Robert. Grace stood up and called out, with a little nasal sound, which made Robert look cute again. Without thinking, he snapped. Well, let's go, get changed and go home. Back. Home. Grace almost thought that she could go back to the same home with Robert. Fortunately, her brain reacted immediately, so she didn't make a joke. Oh, I'm going home. Following behind Robert, Grace's eyes took on an inquisitive meaning. After all, Robert normally would not make this kind of slip of the tongue. After all, Robert usually doesn't make this kind of slip of the tongue. So what was the reason for the slip of the tongue? Grace wanted to find the clue. Sitting in the car, Grace dozed off in a daze, her head down as the car swayed. Suddenly, bam! The wheels rolled over a speed bump and Grace's whole body lurched with the car before slamming into the window. Thud! A crunching sound woke up both of them at the same time. Robert sat bolt upright and opened his eyes, glancing at Grace beside him. He hadn't gotten out of the play until he got in the car, hence the slip of the tongue. It was as if the play was mocking his cowardice, using the character's emotions to show him that all those excuses of his turned out to be too fake, when he was too afraid to admit his own feelings. Watching Grace cover the corner of her forehead, slowly close her eyes again, and start fishing with the car again, Robert finally couldn't help but sigh. He hesitated for a long time, but still couldn't help but gently reach out, around the back of Grace's head, and press the person against himself. It's just, he didn't want to lie to himself anymore. However, he would not say he liked it. First, Grace, who opened her eyes in a daze, didn't even know what Self had missed, and only thought that Self had fallen into a beautiful dream again. Looking at the face of the god of the man close to his eyes, his guts grew, and he smoothly wrapped his arms around Robert's waist, and with a forceful, barfy kiss on Robert's cheek. Ha ha ha. Robert shuddered at his action, and was about to find out what Grace really meant, when he saw Grace rest her head on Self's shoulder and fall back to sleep. This. He was torn between waking up and not waking up for a long time, and finally closed his eyes, intending to forget this experience. A good night's sleep. After a good night's sleep, Grace once again knocked on the door of the house next door with full energy. Robert, good morning. Robert was greeted, of course, by Grace's large white teeth, gleaming in his beaming face. With yesterday's morning workout to sample, Robert quickly adapted to the early morning routine. But after not moving for so long, he hadn't metabolized the lactic acid he had accumulated yesterday, and his body was a little sore. So this morning he just ran with Grace and did a little stretching, but didn't do any strength training with Grace. Grace didn't force Robert to do the same as him, but just surmised that Robert might not want to move due to lactic acid buildup. Robert, do you want a massage? It can get better faster. Massage? Robert thought about the way Self was lying on the bed being tossed around by Grace, and immediately dismissed the idea. A massage was out of the question, especially if Grace was doing it for him. If he reacted halfway through the massage, he would die of embarrassment. Thinking of this, Robert hurriedly refused. No, I'll just do the stretching myself. In fact, Grace still has a little intention of sticking with Robert, but seeing Robert's refusal, she could only give up. Okay, one plan doesn't work and then another, Grace continued. So, does Robert have a fascia gun? I'll give you mine to use later. A fascia gun. Robert blinked, thinking that could be a good idea, but asked one more question. What about you? That concern would have been too much for Grace, who pounded his self-same pecs and kicked his long, strong legs with a smug look on his face. That's not much exercise. I basically don't use a fascia gun anymore. It's all foam shafts once a week, and I'm done. He said it lightly, but Robert heard the youthfulness in it. Gee, it's good to be young. Robert spat without a trace. But he didn't think he was that old, either. He just hadn't exercised in a long time. Okay, I'll give it back to you when I'm done with it. It was convenient for the two of them to be right across the street anyway. After changing her clothes, Grace took the fascia gun and skillfully dabbled in Robert's house, then skillfully dabbed in a cup of coffee. Before he finished the coffee in his cup, he picked up the fascia gun, flicked the switch, and was about to dislike Robert with a wicked grin on his face. Robert, can you use it? Let me help you, it works better. A little fascia gun, can I still not know how to use it? If it wasn't for the fear of spilling the coffee in his hand, Robert would have grabbed it. But there was something in his hand. Robert didn't dodge it and was disliked by Grace. Grace also suddenly had a great deal of fun, and she also improperly pressed Robert's muscles, and flipped her wrist, and even rushed to attack Robert's side waist. Zip, zip, zip. Robert only felt a tingle coming from his waist, and hurriedly moved his waist to avoid the fascia gun. Tisk, be nice if you want to help me, don't get weird. Yes, yes, yes. Robert, sit back and watch me give you a set, a great healthcare. Grace was still giggling, but her hands were very measured. He pressed one hand on Robert's shoulder and used his fingers to feel the changes in Robert's muscles. The other hand took the fascia gun and disliked the muscles. Inch by inch, he relieved that soreness for Robert. As Grace moved, Robert gradually dropped his defenses. It was quite comfortable. Grace. He had just squinted his eyes in enjoyment when he heard Grace's command. Robert, take a deep breath and open your back. Robert complied by taking a deep breath and bulging his back out. The force of the fascia gun penetrated the deep muscles at once. Robert had felt some twinges there yesterday and was surprised to feel incredibly sore as he complied with Grace's movements. By the time Grace had plowed Robert's body with the fascia gun up and down, front and back, he still felt a little unfulfilled. I didn't think you had it in you. Grace put away the fascia gun but didn't stop, instead naturally pressing her hands on Robert's shoulders and gently kneading them. Hey, I was forced to learn it all. It wasn't. The mother superior at home demanded that the three of the males had to stay in shape, so they naturally learned these things. Grace felt funny when she thought of the time when she was forced to work out by her own mother, but she didn't realize that it had become a daily habit. Robert was so comfortable that he closed his eyes and didn't suddenly wake up until his back was pressed against Grace's front. All right, Junko should be here by now. I'll go wash the cups. Grace's force was so comforting, he was getting a little addicted to it. Sheesh. Robert organized his mind and sat up straight, and with that, his face returned to its usual coldness. Grace wanted to continue to stick it to him, Robert, but speak of the devil, Robert's words had just fallen when the doorbell rang. He helplessly withdrew his hand and resigned himself to answering the door. Once in the car, Robert was again aloof with his eyes closed while Grace flipped through photos in her album. He had to obey and stay open. Finally finding a favorite, he handed his phone to Robert as if offering it as a treasure. Robert, is it okay if I send this picture? Robert sniffed and opened his eyes to see. The screen showed exactly Grace's yesterday's bloodstained makeup. In the photo, his eyes were fierce, staring straight at the camera, and there seemed to be a trace of blood seeping out from the corner of his mouth, like a wounded lone wolf. I have to say, this photo is really nice. And it's quite a contrast to Grace's milk dog style. Robert looked over the details of the photo more carefully, raised an eyebrow to gauge Grace's current milk dog expression, and handed his cell phone back. Just post this one, it's pretty good. He was really getting the urge to bully Grace into tears. Instead, all Grace saw was Robert's indifferent expression, and suddenly felt that the picture was just fine. He slightly skimmed his mouth and thought about posting the photo anyway. Only that the words he had originally thought of were replaced with the official tagline, and he was even less in the mood to brush up on the comments. None of those compliments were coming from the mouths of people he genuinely liked anyway. Standing in front of the camera, Robert let the desires growing inside him mingle with Natasha's character's feelings. A few days pass and Charles is pretty much healed from his injuries. Natasha returns from her part-time job and frowns when she pushes open the door to her house, but doesn't see Charles. But when he turned on the light, a bunch of wildflowers on the table instantly caught his eyes. After gazing at it for a long time, he let out a soft laugh and the worry in his heart dissipated. Really? What flowers for a good reason? Saying that, Natasha went back to her room and found an empty bottle and put the flower in it, but just didn't feel like it was perfect enough how she put it. He tweaked the position of this flower, then moved the position of that, forgetting that he hadn't cooked yet, until he heard the door open and he snapped back to his senses, looking back with a faint smile. Back. Pushing the door open, Charles's heart skipped a beat at the sound of those three simple words, and then he gulped vigorously when he saw the small flowers he'd picked on the side of the road reflected in Natasha's white face in the light. Was this home? Charles just felt a surge of electricity run through his body, making him tingle straight away. He clenched his fists, but loosened them again in less than half a second before walking inside and giving Natasha a big smile. Well, I'm home. Charles wanted to be close to Natasha, and he was. Seeing that he dropped what he was holding, he directly went up and bear-hugged Natasha in his arms, not leaving him the slightest room to break free. Natasha was stunned for a moment, and hesitantly raised her arms and hugged Charles's back. At the beginning of living together, Natasha was worried that Charles would make a move on him, but after these days, he realized that Charles had really kept his promise. And with this hug today, Natasha felt that he no longer had a reason to push the man in his arms away. Just as Charles was trying to get an inch closer, I don't know whose stomach growled first, disrupting the bubbling pink atmosphere. I'll go make dinner. Natasha's face swished red, blushing as she withdrew from Charles's embrace and walked into the kitchen with the dishes. Charles was a little reluctant to follow Natasha in, but the small place couldn't accommodate the movements of two people. One moment, the pot was stopped by Charles, and the other moment, the dish was separated behind Natasha. Natasha couldn't care less about her shyness and looked up at Charles with a slight glare, reaching out to push him out. Get out, get out, get out of the way. Haha, okay. After dinner, Charles volunteered to finish clearing the table, but Natasha didn't go to the shower first, as she usually did. Tonight the sky was clear and the stars were twinkling. Natasha wanted to take Charles to a place only he would keep as a secret. Where to? Charles cocked his head as he saw Natasha putting on her shoes again and getting ready to head out the door with the blanket. Natasha smiled mysteriously at Charles and beckoned him over. Just follow me. Looking at Natasha's playful expression, Charles pressed on and followed obediently with a bad smile, and helped Natasha pick up the blanket. After leaving the door, Natasha didn't go downstairs. Instead, she led Charles upwards. The roof was his secret base. He would come when he was happy, and also when he wasn't. And today, he wanted to share his secret base with another person. When she saw the wildflowers that Charles had brought back, Natasha remembered that he had planted a few pots of flowers here before. Having not been here for a long time, he thought that those pots of flowers would wither away. But when he went up to the roof, he was surprised to find that by relying on the nourishment of the earth and sky, these pots of flowers were still alive and well, and were even considered to be eye-catching. Charles, come look, this is what I left here last semester. I didn't expect it to still be alive. Natasha surprised Charles by pulling him to look at it, and reached out to carefully touch the pink petals. Charles, however, only glanced at the flower and set his eyes on Natasha again. He thought to himself, this flower really follows its owner. It doesn't even need to be taken care of. Immediately after that, he went up and held Natasha's hand, interlocking his fingers with his. I'll take care of it from now on, Charles thought. Natasha didn't push Charles away and took his hand and laid out the blanket with him, sitting on it and looking up at the stars. The night wind came and blew up the hem of Natasha's dress gently, revealing the slender waist, fascinating Charles, who was secretly watching Natasha. Charles subconsciously sat a little closer, loosening his clasped hands, but wrapped the person into his arms in Natasha's puzzled look. Not pushing me away? The previous appointment came to mind, and Charles nastily rubbed his thumbs against Natasha's shoulders with lust in his eyes. Natasha, however, only pretended to look at him reproachfully, moved her body, and said shyly with a red face, You hold too tight, can't push away. The mouth was too big for the body. Natasha, in order to cover up her own embarrassment, looked up to see the stars in the sky, staring at one that twinkled every now and then, out of her mind for a moment, before she turned her head to look at Charles again. Charles, have you thought about the future? Natasha's eyes were like stars coming down to earth, bright enough to make Charles freeze for a good while. At this moment, Charles only wanted to press this person into his own flesh and blood. How could he have any sense to think about the future? He shook his head, froze, and said, I have not thought about it. Maybe just find a job. Then, always by your side, protect you. Obviously, he said it in an extremely solemn manner, but Natasha snorted and pushed her arm against Charles's stomach, saying in an extremely exaggerated manner, How do I need you to protect me? I'm not a weakling. Well, so you protect me. Charles gently held Natasha's restless arm, not saying what was on his mind. These thin arms and legs, I'm really afraid that they'll break if I break them. Natasha refound a comfortable angle to lean on Charles's shoulder and looked up at the sky again. Actually, I don't know what I'm going to do in the future. Maybe I'll just follow the stars and drown in them when the time comes. Saying that, he sat up straight again to lock eyes with Charles and said seriously, Do you think, am I being selfish? He had obviously received so much funding, but he didn't think about becoming some top scientist to contribute to his country. Charles can understand Natasha's meaning, but just re-embraced the person into the embrace, rested his head on Natasha's shoulder, whispered in his ear, The earth will still turn without you, but I can't live without you, so you're not selfish. I'm the one who's selfish. Bullshit. Natasha was a little tickled by his breath and rubbed Charles's face close to her, laughing. It's not that serious. I'm not water, and you're not a fish. The corner of his lips brushed against the soft earlobe, and Charles gently took it into his mouth before reaching up to cover Natasha's heart. No, it is. My heart is dead without you. The heartbeat couldn't be faked. and Charles could feel Natasha's rapid yet powerful throbbing, nastily nipping at it gently with his tiger teeth. "Are you a dog?" Natasha instantly turned back and reached up to grab onto the itchy flesh around Charles's waist. "Ha ha ha. Don't, Natasha. I'm going to hit back." "Cut. Wrap it up." Robert snapped back to attention with Grace, both of their breaths a little garbled. Even more so, Robert detected a hint of something strange about Grace. "TSK, youngster." Robert laughed lightly in his heart, though he was no better as all. "Freesterpeen." Robert restrained himself from getting off Grace, glancing at the aberration without a trace and raising an eyebrow slightly. When he met Grace's gaze again, there was a hint of teasing. "Wrapping up, aren't you, Robert?" Grace didn't have the same air as Charles just now, and suddenly became shy. "Is this something I can put away just because I want to?" She lost her voice as she spoke, and it was Robert's good ear that caught the last word. "Ha ha ha." He couldn't hold back the laughter, then reached over and handed it to Grace. "Get up. It's time to go back to resting." "Uh-huh." Grace's eyes met the center line of Robert's pants and blinked, not daring to get the spit out. Robert, was clearly not calm either, and mocking him. Whether Grace slept well this night, Robert didn't know. Anyway, he stayed in the bathroom a little longer and then buried himself in the BL novel again, not daring to think deeply about those images from the set.